In this module now, we look at some of the organizational requirements for securing your data. And as we look at some of these things, we're usually driven by business needs of data security. What does an organization need after we've analyzed what data needs to be secured, what its relative importance is? What are the business factors that are driving our security design? And so as we look at this topic, we need to make sure that our security design addresses the following things. It needs to address cost. How much is our security going to cost us, both when we first implement the security and then as we continue to implement the security, so initial and ongoing cost. The legal requirements, these will affect implementation of the security. What are the requirements that are put upon us? Again, think about external sources driving some of our security design here. So certainly bear in mind that there are certain security designs, security implementations that are going to be dictated that are beyond your control. We also, this is very important, and this is something that you certainly have a lot of control over, and that is your impact on your end users. How will security increase password length, account lockouts, and we'll talk about that in a little more detail. How will all of that impact our end users? That's really ultimately who we have to have an eye towards, is not only meeting certain requirements that might be put on us by others, but also making our network usable by our end users, both our own end users and maybe even clients who use the resources of our networks. We also need to keep an eye towards how security will mitigate the risk. And risk is just simply a probability of suffering a loss of data. So mitigating risk involves identifying what data is at risk, how it's at risk, and deciding what we're going to do about it, deciding the procedures for mitigating risk. Now, before we go on and talk more specifically about the impact on the end users, just to identify in that first bullet point here about the cost of initial and ongoing security design, remember that the cost is not only the cost of action or implementation, but potentially of inaction. For example, if you don't have good security design and a virus gets loose in your network, what is that going to cost you? These are all things that need to be taken into consideration when it's design time. Just to give you a couple of numbers here, you can do a Google search on the internet to look up lots of articles about estimates for the impact of worms and viruses, but estimates are for the years 2000, 2001, 2002. Each year, over $10 billion in lost business and lost data was attributed to viruses and or worms. In fact, the numbers, again, people will differ on the numbers, but the general consensus is that it's over $10 billion a year. It's been going down a little bit in the last couple of years because people are more aware of security practices and procedures that need to be put in place. But nonetheless, that's a lot of money. That's certainly more than, well, if your name's not Gates or Ballmer, it's probably more money than you can afford to spend in one day. So at any rate, what I just simply want you to recognize is that not only does security have a cost to implement, but there's also a cost associated with not implementing. Again, think if your hard drive crashes and you don't have a backup, what is that going to cost you to replace that data? Again, sometimes you can't even put a dollar figure on some of the things that are lost or at risk. So you need to take those things into consideration. Now let's talk about some of the things that maybe you can wrap your mind around, or a little more concrete examples of some of this analysis of business drivers for your security design, and that will be how security affects your end users. How will strong passwords work, or how will they affect the end users? Will a longer password, if you decide to implement a longer password, will that mean that people just write them down and stick them to their monitor? If that's the case, then it's probably not the best type of design. It probably is not a good security design to implement in your particular network. Because unfortunately, with passwords, Post-it note really can defeat the strongest password ever designed. If someone just writes it down and then someone else can either take it or just look at it and copy it down. What about an account lockout? If that's part of your security design, how will that affect users? Do you have users that forget their passwords commonly or that mistype things? Will they be locked out and therefore have downtime that they need to be remedied by help desk personnel to get them unlocked? Again, that is associated that you have a cost associated with help desk personnel trying to fix that problem, and then you have a cost associated with your personnel not being able to work because they're locked out of their accounts. And then one other consideration about end-user impact, another common security implementation is smart cards that can be used. It's a security level that really goes above and beyond passwords. However, people need to renew their certificates that are associated with their smart cards. And in Server 2000, the certificate renewal was not automatic. In 2003, Server 2003, you can configure smart cards for automatic renewal. So that may be a design consideration. If you're using smart cards, it may incent you to upgrade all of your servers to Server 2003. You also want to think about, when implementing smart cards, about setting restrictions on card removal. In other words, the user cannot use the computer if they don't have the smart card inserted into the smart card reader. In other words, a session would be logged out when the smart card is removed. So that can address a restriction of having one user only be able to have one session at a time on a network. So all considerations that you have to carefully weigh as you design your security.